There is a need to decolonize education within Africa because the education that we are having until this day has been in place to perpetuate colonial interests. Time when education was being brought to Africa, that it gained the name Western education, or that is famously known as the formal education, was mainly to teach people how to read and read as a way of easing the work of evangelization, but then also to help in training younger civil servants who would help in the work of administration. Now, 50 years after African countries gained independence, do these African countries still need an education that is going to perpetuate the colonial interests of proclaiming the gospel and administration? We need an education that is going to answer the problems of Africa, mainly the challenges that are relating to youth unemployment, to armed conflict, to food insecurity, and these will help in building a better Africa. That's why there is a need to decolonize African education. Education came to be lame in a sense that it cripples society from the time Plato, the Greek philosopher, established the academia in the 5th century before Christ. In his academia that attracted pupils from the aristocracy, these were from the rich class, he gathered them and he started teaching them the 5 liberal arts, which included logic, rhetoric, geometry, astronomy, and the like. And this was just a form of leisure. It was just having knowledge for knowledge's sake. And that's why we see that actually the Greek word scholar was there to point towards leisure. So from that word, where we are looking at a leisure form of education, we got other translations like the Latin word scholar, the English word school, the German word Schule, the Swahili word Schule, still pointing towards a deformed form of education. Yet in the actual sense, education, etymologically, coming from the Latin word educere, meaning to bring out. It was pointing towards child rearing, bringing out the highest excellency of man. Now, does the education that we have bring out the highest excellence of man? When you are to examine yourself, is that the highest excellence that society expects from you? If we were having the highest excellence in men, then we would be having the solutions to the challenges of Africa. But because we are having an education system that cripples Africa, as well as furthering colonial interests, Africa remains in the stands. And so when this education was only to pass on knowledge for knowledge's sake, it was a deformed form of education. Yet in the actual sense, education has helped in the transformation of society. I mean the right education that helps in the cultivation of the individual in the context of personhood and community. Personhood and community in the sense that we grow the individual when they are valuing society. But here we are grooming or educating individuals that have no sense of the community, that have no sense of the common good. That's why we are having the increasing cases of armed conflicts, we are having increasing cases of corruption, we are having increased cases of embezzlement, because the education is not training these true survival values. When these colonialists come into Africa, and they realized that actually the education that Africa was having was the best education, they decided to water it down as fairy tales, and they actually introduced an education that divided up society, where women were only left into reproduction and men were welcomed into schools. And that is when we begin to see the divide. Otherwise, the typical African education, we wouldn't even actually look at inequality, because all men and women were participating both in reproduction and production. It is why in Africa we need an education that is going to enhance 1, reproduction, 2, production. In the sense that when we are looking at reproduction, we need to have a generation of young people who value family, because the family is the basic and the fundamental source of a sensible society. The moment families are torn apart, then we cannot have a good society. So there is no child who is too young to learn about reproduction, as long as they can learn to nurture and how to groom responsible citizens. But the only problem comes when we begin to understand reproduction in the context of giving birth only. It's not about giving birth, it's beyond giving birth to nurturing a generation. And that's the kind of education that Africa needs. Then too, In production, when you call yourself educated, but then you don't have any product, you don't have any good, you don't have any service that you take to the market, but you are simply availing yourself to be employed, then you will end up availing yourself to be enslaved. Therefore, you must have something that you take to your clients. As you spend hours on social media, make sure that you are only networking with your clients, or you are finding market, or you are spending hours on social media for business, not spending hours on social media when you are scrolling through people's lifestyles and through events. That is not going to liberate Africa. And therefore, this calls for a collective effort. Meanwhile, we call on our leaders, meanwhile, we call on the ministers to revisit the education. That at this time now they are beginning to, many countries are talking of the new curriculum. It's not going to liberate Africa. When we are talking about revisiting the education system of Africa, we must make sure that from the word go, we are only looking at passing on skills of reproduction and production, because ideally these are the basics that build society. So we shouldn't be sharing knowledge for knowledge's sake. You don't have to teach a child Canadian prejudice for the sake of teaching Canadian prejudice. We must be able to teach these values that are going to keep families intact, as well as ensuring means of production within the society. Make sure that you are having a product, and therefore if this education you received was a disservice to you, if the education you received was so unfortunate, then make sure that you work your way out to make sure that you have any product you take to your clients, that you have any service that you are selling out. If you are not able to produce a product or to produce a good or a service, then you shouldn't also participate into reproduction. But then we are having a moment where girls and boys are getting into reproduction without having the skills of production. How are you going to feed the children you are producing? So these two aspects are important, and they must be integrated into the African education if we are really ready to liberate Africa.